yes, I am here, but nobody is yet. And so I'll just stay off camera temporarily. And I could actually adjust my mic a little better. I think people will hear me better that way. Oh yeah, that'll be a lot better. Okay. Get back there. And hey, hello, Callan. Let me come on. I guess I can put my camera on now. So. There I am. Okay, so that's about a 10-second delay. That's good. So I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm assuming whoever would be here is probably personally holding up. But the new year is getting underway. And there's a journey to be had. There's a lot to do. And if you're not prepared for something, you might end up getting buffeted by the winds of change. It seems, at least from some of the data, intel, personal intel, you know, how people are doing. Yeah, it seems like people are breaking down a little bit. Not everybody. But I guess, you know, there are a lot of people who are, you know, who are just kind of, you know, just doing life, you know, without a real existential view, or an existential view that is given lip service to, but not necessarily heart service. There are a lot of details or at least factoids that are emerging in all kinds of ways, and some people who have slightly broader horizons about their intake of data might be aware of it. But to me, there's actually two energies kind of working, and one will be the exoteric or the exterior part of things, and that'll be like, you know, how we react to world events and local events and things like that. Hello, Mari. But there's also something very profound happening on the planet, and from the Gnostic perspective, and that's what Can't You Hear Me Gnostic is about. You know, basically commenting on the same things we're all going through, but from at least this Gnostic perspective. Hello, Lee, and hello, Jessica. And so, from the Gnostic perspective, what is going on is that since 2014, the planetary intelligence, hello Pam, the planetary intelligence, also known as Sophia, VV by certain people, and anyway, the planet, she has agency. The planetary intelligence has agency. And that agency has been developing. And now a big part of that is to gain access to us. I mean, I really feel that the distribution throughout the galaxy of sentient species is for the animating spirit of all to be able to enter through. And then I think according to each galaxy and each planet, things differ a little bit, but it's the same spark. The same, I mean, the same spark is shared, even the same spark that even the aeons share in common with us, the originator. I don't get too hung up on the originator because that's not where our story has its agency. Our story, the human story, is our agency is on this planet, and our kind of divine coordinator would be the planetary intelligence, or Sophia by some words. It's not really a name. Sophia means wisdom in Greek, and that is the quality. That is the aeonic quality that she was emanated from the originator as. And it's also probably why she was the first emanation, because you don't want to really begin to go into the phenomenal world without wisdom as the cornerstone of it all. And then, of course, she was coupled with thelete, which is intent. So intent and wisdom is quite a powerful package. And due to the cosmic anomaly of Sophia yearning so desperately to assist the species that was seeded into the galaxy, because it wasn't doing well. And my guess would, if I were to kind of, hello, Raksha, if there were civilizations rising and falling in a way that seemed, there was an experiment to see what would happen when they seeded the galaxy with life that could become, organic life. And I would think that part of the reason why the galactic experiment probably may not have been going as well as, at least from her perspective, was that it probably wasn't enough wisdom in the galaxy. So, I mean, in the Gnostic cosmology, also the Gnostic mythos, and mythos is the truth contained in stories, and the stories can be really quite on, and sometimes get quite symbolic. Excuse me. But apparently, the desire to bring more wisdom into the galaxy, so that the intelligences that were seeded throughout the galaxy to carry the aeonic intelligences and the spark of life. It was apparently from the records we get from the old shamans. It wasn't going well, and in her desire to kind of do more, to actually interfere in an experiment that's supposed to be basically hands off. That's what an experiment is. When you start tweaking the results of this experiment, you get things like global warming. So it's best not. But anyway, apparently, again, as the wisdom of the Pleroma, it might have been. She go, oh man, if just a little more wisdom in these critters, and I bet you they do better. So, due to a cosmic anomaly and everything else, anyway, she ends up turning into a planet, Earth. And so the species that arose on this planet, it has to me, actually has quite a good headwind in developing wisdom. And in my own, I have to divert from, just temporarily, from the narrative that is laid out very well by John Lamb Lash. To me, the thing that John Lamb Lash is most, I have to give all credit for, is the restoration of the Gnostic thought. The fact that it really kind of came to a crashing end about 2,000 years ago, and was starting to splinter, and then we get the Nag Hammadi texts, which to me show the splintering of the original narrative, the insertion of the new narratives coming out of the Levant. That would be the Yahweh narratives. And And I can see what when I read the Nag Hammadi, when I as I'm making my way through various parts of the Nag Hammadi text, and I'm really glad I didn't read Nag Hammadi texts until I had the restored Sophianic narrative. And it's not, the restored Sophianic narrative isn't something that like I got from listening. And even the other interesting thing, and I might have mentioned this in my last stream, is I read Not in His Image this year, but I've been listening to John Lash orally deliver the narrative since 2010. And I really value that the way I was able to receive that information was in the traditional way, which is through oral tradition. A way that knowledge can be transmitted even if you're not literate. By literate, I don't mean that you don't know your language, you can't speak it, and that you can't express yourself in it. I'm talking about when you bring it to letters. So I was really glad that I was able to get the whole picture. I mean, when I read Not in His Image, there was, other than some historic details that didn't really affect the narrative that I knew. I mean, it was like, some more details and more related to the history of the Gnostics as opposed to what the narrative was. The narrative I got in an oral form. And I find that very precious. And then even the way, the Mandela effect, something that, certainly was all over all of the internet, the New Age forums and whatever kind of forums you want, conspiracy forums. And everybody could bring forward the stuff, but it was just like, what is this? And the only person who, to me, actually saw what was going on in the Mandela effect and then decoding it was John Lash. I thought that was really brilliant. I mean, a subject that there was nothing but confusion and plenty of supposition, but the supposition didn't have a kind of like a logic running through it, and then pieces that fit together like puzzle pieces. So John Lash has really done some pretty brilliant work. He's catching a lot of heat right now because apart from the greater, I guess, Gnostic reclamation of the planet, he also has his Kalika War Party, and that has created some controversy. But I'm not going to go there because that's for him. That's his thing. When I speak of John Lash, for me, I'm going to be focusing on the Sophianic narrative, what that means to us, and I will be getting to that. I was waiting just to see what kind of group might join. It looks to me that it might be a quiet night, but actually, I don't mind. It's not about the numbers, it's about who's interested, because to speak to anybody who isn't interested doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, the title of tonight, Journeys and Maps, ties in to a theme, to me, the theme for 2018, journeys. But the journey isn't meant to be a solo journey. This is, yes, I agree, Pam. And the only one who brought sanity. But the journey. Many times, journey often implies something we're going to be doing in our own personal. I'm going to use the word spiritual quest, Pam. I know the word's mantique. So on their desire to know more, very often journeys are kind of solo events. The nature of the journey for this year is based on companions. And it ties in a little bit to the hero's journey. But one of the things that, and it's something I've discussed, and I think I've discussed it with Raksha. And it has to do with the whole making of the hero's journey as if like, the glory for the hero, as opposed to almost all of the myths that have hero stories, especially, again, we're talking about from a more ancient milieu than the new milieu where they kind of cast the hero as the sole person, and that's part of the we'll call it archontic influence. The hero's journey was always done with companions. Here, the hero, I mean, with the rare, Beowulf is probably one of the few exceptions, but the classical hero's journeys, whether it was Hercules, Odysseus, Jason. I mean, what do we really know Jason as? Jason and the Argonauts. The Argonauts were the companions. And so this is really, the journey for this year is about finding companions. And there may be one person who has more courage, but that courage is contagious. And it, so the journey part is really important. And it's starting to kind of bleed through. It's starting to kind of become apparent that if you're not ready to journey, there might be consequences to not being ready to change things. Of course, the biggest change is within yourself, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing Can't You Hear Me Gnostic, because one of the biggest changes we can make is in our spiritual mapping. Because what is a journey without a map? The journey we're making is a little bit of lands unknown, but it's really more like lands unexplored as opposed to completely unknown. And a big part of inner work, like shamanic type work, not necessarily, you don't have to be a shaman, but shamanic work, is having a map of the other side. Just like we have a map of our globe or our planet, our Earth. Oh, I'm not even gonna try and soften it up for people who think that the Earth is flat. I don't think I have that here. I mean, I'm not close to it, but I mean, it's some people. Hello, soul traveler. There's like some people who try to make the round Earth as like some kind of NASA conspiracy. It was the Greeks who posited that the Earth was round, and I'm quite sure they got that from an even more ancient thing. The interesting thing about our history is about as far back as we're willing to go with the archontic history is kind of the Greeks and the Romans. And if you notice, they leave Egypt alone a lot. Even though they were contemporaneous, and Egypt lasted well into the Greek and Roman period, they kind of downplay it. And I think one of the reasons why they downplay Egypt over Greece and Rome is because the Egyptian pantheon was not grossly patriarchal. They still had Nut and Mot. Mot, the sky, the one at birth, everything. And there's plenty of allusions to a primal mother still in the Egyptian pantheon, where the Greeks and the Romans had gone, full Zeus and Jupiter. And they had, Zeus and Jupiter had their wife, and but basically in the pantheon, the only other one who got their planet was Venus, and Venus was the stand-in for Gaia. I've mentioned it before. They have all these statues of a faceless, what might appear to be obese woman. To me, what they're portraying is a globular feminine, like the planet, faceless, very respectful, but they call them like the Venus of Willendorf. Sorry guys, that isn't Venus. That's Gaia, and you guys are covering it up. Just the same thing why they had to have a Venus in their, or an Aphrodite in their pantheon. They needed someone to stand in to cover for that divine feminine that had been completely all part of the ancient world, and of course turn into something capricious and vain. Basically, in many ways, the kind of maybe the best way that they could cast a woman with all of the faults that have to be placed into the feminine. The Greeks, put in their mythos when they decided to move from the female system of antiquity, making Gaia a conspirator with her son Kronos to overthrow Uranus. I mean, again, it's just that treachery that women cannot be trusted. That is all part of the change over from the world of antiquity to the modern patriarchal world. It is the demeaning of the feminine. So for me, part of the journey, like, where are we going? Hopefully we're not going anywhere as much as journeying inwardly to reclaim our rightful place on this planet. And I just took time out to look at the chat for a second. So to me, one of the biggest journeys for a lot of people is escaping either a mind trap of thinking that we're sinners and there might be some hell to pay. I don't think too many are here necessarily carry that, although there might be residuals. You never know. And just like myself, probably around 2012, and I realized there were certain little things I kind of wasn't doing in my inner life because I still hadn't kind of cut that complete chord. It was like playing it safe. And the moment I caught that, I didn't realize it was happening. As soon as I caught it, I stopped playing it safe. Yes, Raksha, very happy you made it home safely. I'll catch up with myself in a moment. That's right. I don't like to drink out of my glass jar, so I'll drink out of this. But I had to finish my creatine water. Yep. But I agree. That's a great. Pam Kennedy said, I think it's well worth exploring to check how much savior we have stuck somewhere. It's sneaky. And it is. And you find that's why you need the inner work. You might sit there and go, I'm all clear. It's not until you go inside and start to do things that you might find out that there's webbing on you. And you really have to be moving in a more subtle manner to feel that. You have to be moving in the spaces where, in the inner spaces where that kind of stickum and tethering hold you back. Ah, yeah, the Charlotte. I'll put that in the thing. The Charlotte. I don't think the Charlotte working is a great thing for a lot of people to be discussing publicly. Personally, I mean, it's out there in the. To me, it's like there's a portion. I mean, it's all out in the public, but I feel like that's almost like John's thing to handle. Um, I mean, I think there's only so much. I think there's only so much conversation about the Charlotte working that should be had. Yeah, yeah, certainly in a campfire situation. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate the support because, yeah, I like the fact that there's utter transparency, but there's also what I would consider prudence and situational awareness. And as we're morphing, as we're becoming the divine child, there, to me, becoming, to me, really to come into our connection, to understand who we are, the extension into physical reality we are. I read Raksha for a second. I'll catch my thought. Um, and I'm glad you wrote it, Raksha. Um, oh yes, situation. I know it's connected to the Charlotte working. As we, as we become the divine, the divine, the luminous child, and the way to connect is through our, I feel, through our hearts, because that's where I find the seat of wisdom, is in our hearts. Hello, Tamu. If I had not seen you tonight, I was going to email you and ask you what happened to you. Welcome. So, wisdom is an interesting consciousness. And it's tied in with agape and compassion. But compassion can also get tricky. And the reason why I say that is, let's say we have an organism, like your body. And the organism, part of your body goes rogue, gets cancerous. So now part of your body is a threat to the rest of your body. Can you really have equal compassion for the tumor and the health of your greater body? I don't see the logic. I don't see utility. I think it's beautiful that humans are willing to have empathy and compassion, even for sometimes for pathogens. Although I do notice that, like, let's say the pathogen is a bacteria in your body, and you choose antibiotics as a treatment. I can't imagine anybody's taking those antibiotics and thinking anything other than, I hope it kills every last fucking bacteria in my body so I can stop suffering. But if you take that same kind of antagonistic, adversarial, pathogenic behavior, and it has a human face on it, I mean a real human face, like with a human body, compassion can be challenged. And that's when I think it becomes important that we recognize our compassion. We would want to be without it. But then also the wisdom of understanding that when part of something that was once healthy is now ill, of course, the first thing is you would like to try and bring that to wellness. But if you can only apply so much energy bringing it to wellness or wholeness while it's eating you. So there just becomes a point where the compassion has to be for what is under attack and not for the attacker. So just peripherally speaking, about the working, I see a lot of, I'm going to call it emotional reaction. I think it's a form of compassion, but I think it does. Compassion without wisdom is not compassion. It's a form of it, but I mean, compassion needs to serve the human condition. It needs to preserve us, keep us healthy. And by Mari. I'm probably going to stop looking at the chat while I do this. It'd be easier for me. So, and that's part of immunocompetence, that blue-green thing I talk about that has to do with the thymus gland, where T cells, the killer cells of our body, get their education. And this is, like I've said it before, you can do a search on immunocompetency, and you will find out that this is something that happens to certain white cells that go to the thymus gland and come out as T killer cells. Thymus gland is a combination of the wisdom of the heart and the will, the higher will of the throat chakra, the blue-green, wisdom and will. Wisdom and intent. So in many ways, I see the thymus gland as the syzygy, or the pairing of wisdom and intent. Or in Greek it would be Sophia and Thelete. And the interesting thing about aeons is their names are their qualities. So Sophia, although properly pronounced in Greek as Sophia, but that's also a woman's name. So Sophia becomes the aeon's name. Just a little healthy distinction. But if you would say wisdom in Greek, you would say Sophia. And so the intel we get from the ancients, who spent a lot of time doing this stuff, that the syzygy, or the pairings, because the way emanations happen in most cases are syzygies and pairings. And so it seems like the very first pairing was wisdom and intent. And it makes great cosmic sense. I can't imagine what quality that the originator would put into the phenomenal world to have agency, and starting without wisdom, and then have wisdom without an intent would be silly. So you kind of see the beauty, you see the balance, you see the wisdom of the universe, even in those emanations. If I was going to tell the Sophianic narrative in a few sentences, I mean, really just keeping it as simple as maybe as you might tell somebody who you want them just to. I'm going to just talk from a galactic perspective, because that is all that really applies to us. And it's also what all the intel was about, because any other intel wasn't really, I mean, there was some peripheral intel. The creation of a galaxy. Now, when we do look into the night sky, the pictures they present us, and you see all these galaxies in different angles and whatever, and They seem to be just hanging in space. I know the electric universe has now shown, and there are certain spectrums that you can actually see. What looks like empty space is full of activity. Electrical, plasmic, there's all. It's like a sea. It's like an ocean out there. And my guess is that it certainly seems like the galaxies kind of create their own little space in there. But I see the originator, and I should say I have seen, or however you want to call those journeys, just so we put it in perspective. It's almost, like we're in a phenomenal world. And so imagine almost like a 0 point of like one side is unmanifest and the other side's manifest, and the originator being on the unmanifest side. So it begins by emanating from unmanifest into manifest, and the first manifestations of wisdom and intent. A good plan, in my opinion. And then it gets populated with other qualities until that, I guess, the many qualities of the originator get externalized into the phenomenal world. And then, once they get settled, then they're who knows how many billions or millions or whatever. I mean, it really is no time. So that's the other thing is when you do this stuff, it's really just best to keep it in mythological time and not Chronos time. Because a lot of times, when did that happen? Oh, you mean how Chronos figured the universe out for us? No, thank you. And then, so basically, you have the formation of the pleroma through the emanations. The emanations become this glowing center. And then you have the kenoma, which are the arms of the galaxy. And this is not, part of the narrative, but part of my own work. Because to me, the whole idea is once you get the narrative, which is a map. This is why the narrative is a cosmological map. Once you get the map, it's time to go exploring. And that's what, for me, what John Lash did in giving us the Sophianic narrative was he gave us a map. A very common shamanic map is the Yggdrasil, the world tree of the Norse, or that grouping of people. I guess we'll call it the Vikings. Although it also included Germanic races. That they had a world map of Yggdrasil and the world tree, and they had the 9 worlds, and so they had Alfheim, which is where the elves were, and Jotunheim, where the giants were, Niflheim, Asgard, Midgard. So they had a map, and the shamans would use the world tree, which is often why in a lot of, if you've read, I think it was Mark Connor was one of the first kind of Western people to write a book on shamanism. I think he wrote wrote the book that kind of made shamanic a term shaman a term we understood, and he also taught the drumming method, how to enter a trance state in that drumming method trance state. And very often what you have in shamanic journeying is they have this concept of you going to an upper world or an underworld. And usually you might do it yourself. A lot of shamans have animal guides or other kinds of guides depending on what world they're going to. But there's a map. And in the mythos that they constructed, that map worked. So for me, the whole idea of the Sophianic narrative, and I'll get back to it, and I'll even start from the beginning because it'll be very short, is to start journeying, to start getting to know your neighborhood in the cosmos. And I found that map enormously helpful. And some of this, so I will call some of the extra narrative that I'm giving is based on journeying. And let me get recentered. That is good coffee. I feel like Scott Adams. If you don't know who Scott Adams is, he was I don't know if he's still doing it, but he was the creator of Dilbert, the comic, and now he does commentary. And a lot of you know, it's kind of a right-wing commentary, but he has this thing about where before he starts, he has his coffee, and then before he goes, oh, everybody raise your thing, so I wouldn't do anything silly like that. Well, actually, it's not silly, it's just a ritual. But when I drank it, that coffee was really good, especially since my mouth was dry from speaking so much. So before I get back on track, I'm going to check the live chat. Now, what's interesting about, since many of the people here are also part of the same group that will go to the Moose Lodge and Nox Mente, it's like our group. And then, of course, we have some extras. Some people like Pam Kennedy, who I'm very glad to see, and Tamu, who occasionally comes there. But the interesting thing is how Raksha and I tend to kind of converge in some of the things we cover. Matter of fact, a lot of things we cover, and it's not coordinated. We'll have conversations, like all of us have conversations, but the inspiration of those from those conversations will often find its way into the live streams. And so Raksha did a 3-part tarot reading, but of a wholesome tarot. And I don't consider the original tarot particularly wholesome. I'll just say that. And the theme that he came up with, and I should say the cards told us for 2018 was journey. So, a little moose whispered in my ear, the fact that, we all have our divination tools, and I use 2, which happen to be the runes and the animal cards. And, things are getting wild. Things are getting quite wild. So, I had a look. I didn't have time for an animal card. I had time for a rune. The rune I pulled, and the interesting thing is, the different names, but the rune I pulled was the Rad rune. It even looks like an R. Has a short, the leg that comes down is a little bit shorter than a typical R leg. The Rad rune is journey. Got my book here? Let me actually read. Where's my book? There it is. Okay. Where's Rad? Gotta put my glasses on. Better start drinking that carrot juice again. Okay, 131. That's the page. Okay, this is what it looks like. I should get back onto my main camera so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. So this is what it looks. Come on, everything's reversed in the camera here. So that's what it looks like. Oh, there we go. And my finger's on it finally. There we go. That's it. So that's the rad rune. And if you see, if you can read what it says journey, communication, union, reunion. Now, one of the reasons communication is tied in with journey is because it is a rune that communicates the some of the qualities of Mercury, which are travel and communication. And I did pull it upright. When you pull runes, they can be reversed. This one came upright. So I think I'll read it. This rune is concerned with communication, with the attunement of something that has two sides, two elements, and with the ultimate union that comes at the end of the journey, when what is above and what is below are united and of one mind. Boy, is that full of meaning. I might even have to unpack that. Inner worth mounts here, and at such a time you are not intended to rely entirely upon your own power. Instead, ask what constitutes right action. Ask through prayer or meditation, through addressing the witness self, the teacher within. Once you are clear, you can neutralize your refusal to let right action flow through you. Not intent on movement, be content to wait. While you wait, keep on removing resistances. As the obstructions give way, all remorse arising from trying to make things happen disappears. The journey is towards self-healing, self-change, and union. You are concerned here with nothing less than unobstructed, perfect union. But the union of heaven and earth cannot be forced. Regulate any excesses in your life. Material advantages must not weigh heavily on this journey of the self toward the self with a capital S. Stand apart even from like-minded others. The notion of strength in numbers does not apply at such a time for this part of the journey. The soul's journey cannot be shared. Another of the cycle runes, Rado, as he pronounces the word, carries within its form the rune of joy. For now the end is in sight. You are no longer burdened by what you've left behind. Heaven above you and earth below you unite within you to support you on your way. So that is that. And what's interesting is how once you taking this rune was not taken in isolation. It was taken in with the journey and with the fact of this being a two universal year, of the world. So that's about partnership. So if I had pulled this rune for myself, it would have been about my own journey. But I had pulled this. So this union reunion was what I was talking about getting clear so that the planetary intelligence, Sophia, can work through you. Now, so it's not about, and nor is it about surrender. It's surrendering to the wisdom that is unique for you, that is unique to your skill set, or maybe some skill sets you would be better off, you would be well off to develop. Okay, let me take a look at the nice Tamu, or very good, I should say. Hi, Sandy. I have been I haven't I haven't pulled the medicine card yet, and I won't do a live medicine card pull because I'm not convinced I will bring the proper mantique to the situation. So how is everybody out there? Oh, hello, Jet Pet. Okay, a question. What do I think of the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck? Well, it's very tied in. It's the problem is that you have so much. It's not clean. It has the Wheel of Fortune in it, which I consider to be the archontic wheel of fuckery. I mean, just the way that it's kind of presented, it kind of, to me, the Rider-Waite deck reinforces a lot of an archontic world. That's why there are certain decks that apparently I think people who seem to have gotten that. So a case in point is what would be the Wheel of Fortune in the Rider-Waite deck in the deck that Raksha used. The Wheel of Fortune, if I recall, was the wheel, and in this case, it wasn't the archontic Wheel of Fortune, which is the planets moving around and creating all kinds of fuckery, which is why they put the planets there. But the sacred wheel, the original, one form of let's think of the Native American sacred wheel, where you have the 7 directions. All right, instead of the heptomad, you have the 7 directions. If Raksha's there, maybe he can answer it. I don't know the name of it. I'm not a tarot reader. I mean, I have some tarot decks, but the tarot is not my thing. Can I get back to where I was? I'll get back to it. The Wheel of Fortune. So the sacred wheel was where you are the center. That you're the first direction. The center is the first direction, and then you would have north, south, east, and west, above and below. That was the sacred wheel, or if even the medicine wheel, where you just kind of you have the 4 colors and the directions. That is the sacred wheel is a way of it's kind of a map of understanding, where the Wheel of Fortune is dealing is kind of putting in your space these archontic forces that influence us. Most important to remember, the stars influence, they do not compel. So the Wheel of Fortune is kind of like just the people who are not empowered, may not even be paying attention to what planet is where, and to understand the fuckery of it all. To me, astrology is the study of archontic fuckery, and I consider it a very useful tool. I consider astrology an art, and given that we have all the fuckery in the skies, you would want to be able to track it. I guess Raksha's not here, or he would have answered that for you, Tamu. So if he comes back, oh, there he is. He's back now. So maybe he'll hear me say, Tamu asked a question of the deck you use, Raksha. So anyway, back to my my post-it note version of the creation myth. So the unseen, the originator, from the unmanifest manifests aeons. 2 of the aeons that we'll identify because they're very applicable to our story are Sophia and Thelete. Sophia is huge in the story because she became the planet we're on. At some point, life was seeded into the galactic arms to settle where, basically to settle on anything, and then based on the environmental niche that this panspermia landed in, it could unpack itself. It had ways of it had tendril there. I don't need to get this. Is supposed to be the short version. So a divine experiment was conducted in the pleroma. The galaxies were seeded with life, and there are different ways. But to me, somehow some kind of almost like let's call it something like a coronal mass ejection. In my journeying, John has a little tube scenario, and again, he's journeyed with more people. So it's just, and it might apply differently for the Earth, but I'm not going to get there. So anyway, so we end up, the experiment was not going well, at least from one of the aeonic perspectives, and apparently that created a drive that created a parting from the pleroma and a hurtling towards the outer arms of the galaxy, kind of seemingly either ending or slamming into the Orion Nebula, seemingly losing some of the life force, or just, in that arriving here, I guess maybe some divine sweat came off. But it just so happens that life force formed into something rather wrong. The Orion Nebula, according to certain like Draco reptilian type stuff, seems to have had a bad vibe there. Who knows? But anyway, we ended up with Yaldabaoth, and then he generated some things that end up being called the Archons, rulers. They could be called a lot of things, but Archons works. Now my own personal intel, so it could be my own imagination, is that although I feel the originator emanated the aeons to have agency in the phenomenal world, but I really feel that part of the space that all the galaxies float in is actually part of that unseen, I guess, the universal intelligence, of which the originator might be an aeon of that. But we don't need to get lost in that, because that's where we get lost. We're on Earth, and boy, do we have work to do, starting on ourselves. My gnosis on Yaldabaoth arising, and I do believe there was something toxic in the Orion Nebula from the seedings were in place. We had already seen, apparently from the pleroma, the aeons were observing civilizations rise and fall through their own stupidity and a lack of wisdom. So humanity, so obviously the drama, the experiment had been unfolding for eons instead of aeons. And so there was a lot of activity. It wasn't like when she left the pleroma and came into the end of the arms, like there was no activity in the galaxy. And based on the fact that apparently the performance wasn't so good, there might have been pockets of the galaxy where things were kind of icky, and particularly toxic. And my guess is that the Orion Nebula might have had some toxicity in it. So that's one way of why when some of her life force got loose and was kind of there to be picked up, why it might have morphed into something as distorted as Yaldabaoth. But then the other thing that came to me after, because that was the first one that came, and then deeper meditations, was that the experiment was going to, the divine experiment, although it was going poorly, or not poorly, but maybe from other aeonic perspectives, it was just going the way it was going. But wisdom is also compassion. So the aeon of compassion apparently was not content to just watch the experiment. That is part of what I opened with, that there are some seriously bad players on this planet. And the idea of like, oh, what do we do with them? Because the real thing to do with them I'm not sure I can go there. That's the beauty of our compassion. That's the beauty of our empathy. But it's a double-edged sword. So I believe, wisdom and compassion to me are basically synonymous. So she got involved, and I think that the originator kind of can see everything happening even before it's happening, and that her fix was going to unbalance the experiment. In other words, now there was going to be a humanoid species arising on a planet that had an aeonic intelligence in it. In other words, it was not where all the other ones kind of got that divine spark that went out with the panspermia, that connection to the pleroma and all the qualities there. And then arising into consciousness and being able to go, oh, yeah, okay, because you're connected, you're plugged in. That one of those species would be on a planet with an aeon of compassion and wisdom, especially the wisdom, could unbalance things. I mean, it was almost like a home team. It was almost like, the Yankees playing a local Little League club. Because the experiment was supposed to be see the universe into the Kenoma as it is and see what arises. And what was arising was apparently distressing to Sophia. She got involved. Intentionally or not. Could have just been a yearning that turned into something unexpected. The funny thing is, there's kind of like this backstory of the originator in things. That anonymous, universal kind of a wink. It's like if shh. I'm not here, but I'm here. And so, owing to what I would think could be a severe advantage as far as conducting an experiment, because the experiment was no longer equal. You have all these humanoid species throughout the galaxy arising on planets that and their connection to the pleroma, to the divine, is through the divine spark. Then we're on a planet, and a portion, and one of the primary portions, and to me probably the portion that would make all the difference, becomes the planet. And then we are in that intelligence. We are in that dream. And I think that was such an advantage that perhaps the arising of Yaldabaoth wasn't as accidental as it looked. It was a balance for the advantage that the Gaian Anthropos would have. I'm not saying this is just a little supposition based on. I mean, it's supposition for you. For me, it's my gnosis. It's. I mean, I can be dislodged from it. It's not stuck in there, but I'm working from that behind the stories, behind the scenes, seen unseen. But because once you have certain stuff like that, it's kind of hard to dislodge it when it's experiential. Because gnosis is supposed to be what you experience, what you know. You know, it's not a belief. It's like, but I did this. I didn't. You know, this was like, you know, I experienced this. And so, in many ways, the great challenge is this influence onto the consciousness of the planet that is spiteful, envious, jealous, not creative, incapable of really much. I mean, apparently there was certain aping when Sophia was forming into the Earth. There was some aping of them turning their consciousness into those planets. And that's why Mars has this quality and Neptune has this quality. Those qualities they were placed there by archons of a quality. You have to realize everything is a mimicry. So what Yaldabaoth would have done with his primary archons is try to emanate things. Everything from Yaldabaoth and the archons is all based on copying and mimicry. And all done, you know, in certain cases it's an attempt to do the real thing, but there's always it's all done from envy, jealousy, spite. And I think I've heard John mention that, you know, the ancients had no particular, you know, the ancient Gnostics had no particular animus towards Yaldabaoth. It was something to be left alone. Just like, you know, if you're living where lions aren't, and they're not harassing you, you don't go harass the lions. The basic thing is, from what I can tell, was you do not connect with it. You do not engage in dialogue. You can observe it. You can see it's there, but you can also see it's kind of like dog shit. You avoid it. You know, you don't have to curse the dog shit. You don't have to hate the dog shit. Just avoid it. So, I don't have any particular, actually, compassion arises when I think of the sad state of Yaldabaoth and the archons. Sure, they're fuckwads. Sure, they suck. But they got nothing. Kind of like, you know, so kind of like people who troll YouTube channels. They got nothing. They got nothing. That's why they troll. How you like? They got nothing. How's that for good grammar? So I don't really kind of have that. I don't. Again, it's you can leave just if they would be left alone. But we at this point they're so inserted. The world is our contact, not the planet. The world. And that's because certain people in the ancient world, and I'll call this a little bit prehistorical, but we probably start picking up the history of the historical kind of a track of this fuckery in Babylon and their magic and what their magic system was based on and the kind of beings they were contacting and interacting and contracting with. The counsel they were receiving from these deities, archon angels. And the reason why the ideology spread as well as it did is because since they were parasitic, they didn't have to worry about using, what metals at that time. It wasn't like we were getting ore like we do currently. Ore was fairly precious. Smelting it, required energy. And if you would come out of the forest and now we're practicing agriculture, you needed implements. So your metal was precious. You needed shovels and plows and rakes and whatever things you might use, and scythes. The implements you're going to need to feed yourself. But the parasitic influence, when it got a hold of certain people, was you would take those metals and instead turn them into shields, swords, spears, knives. Killing. I'm not talking about utilitarian knives. Because you didn't have to worry about growing agriculture because you were going to go steal it. You didn't need any farm implements. And this, so what happened, we kind of get, Yaldabaoth shows up, comes different names, but apparently the Hebrew name would be like Yahweh. And instruct people, decide, okay, you have promised us power, so we're going to work for you. What do you need us to do? Well, got a few villages. First of all, remember that land I'm going to give you? Got people on them. You got to kill them first. So anyway, it kind of started that way. So the system that came through with the military, and that's why it spread as far as it did. It wasn't like, oh, you people have been doing this for tens of thousands of years. We have a new system. Are you interested? We know about your system. We've been avoiding it for tens of thousands of years. No, thank you. But the sword didn't allow it to stay as a debate. The sword allowed their debate, no matter how full of holes and poor, it had no legs, no real logic other than power. But that logic came with the sword. And so that's kind of where I think where we get to the problems of today is that if you didn't have any external enemies, if there were no apparent external enemies, building weapons would be kind of, you could have a few of them, but to devote resources into weaponry, to devote healthy adults away from whether they're weaving, making tables, chairs, building carts. You take them away and just basically say, here, you can stand here with a spear in your hand until you're called upon. What a waste of resources. So those kind of resources only started becoming wasted when it became unwise not to waste them. And that's what happens when you get into a certain point of sickness, where what now becomes wise would have been unwise in a healthy situation. So we have to be adaptive. Basically what it is we have a pathogen, we have an infection, and it needs to be dealt with. Okay, I'm going to take a quick little break. I'm going to put my picture up, and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Oh boy, gotta do something with this hair. So, what's going on there? Did I miss anybody? I think I got everybody. Oh, I didn't say hello to you, Robin. Hello, Robin. All right, got everybody. So, let me get back to my camera. So, journeys and maps. I think I finished. Yeah, I think I pretty much kind of, finished the story. I mean, the basic story: originator, aeons, cosmic experiment going on in the galaxy. One of the aeons is concerned, full of compassion about how things are turning out. Kind of gets very focused on the problem. Seems to kind of pinch off hurdles to the outer arms of the galaxy. Finds herself in a situation, turns herself into a planet, and here we are. That's the really short version of it. So what are we going to do? I have, from my personal journey, from when I changed where I had kind of pulled my plug. I had very much pulled my plug out of the we'll call it the Jehovah socket when I was around, I don't know, 15, 16, maybe earlier, maybe even 14, because I think it was at 14 that I stopped being an altar boy. And the reason I stopped being an altar boy is because I said, you guys got nothing here. We've had a lot of discussions. Your answers really stink. Your answers out and out suck. So I have to leave. And there were, different things, but the most profound thing was understanding that psychological space that we have, that humans are built to kind of have, to contain, let's call it the God concept. And, and somebody has, some people have taken me to task because of my very first video was Gaia Sophia is our God. When you consider that the collective of aeons could also be called the gods. So that makes Sophia a god who happens, and then if we're going to genderize it, the god, it becomes a her. But again, at the kind of like, to me, root linguistic level, the aeons fit the same kind of English term as gods. So one of the gods is a god. And if it happens to be female, we could further clarify it and call it a goddess. When I plugged in to the Earth, to the planetary intelligence, and that became where I directed anywhere sacred directions to the Creator, because I find, especially in the Nakamai text, they're very much into the originator and the pleroma, and I don't. That's almost, to me, that's very much tied into the archontic stuff, where you do, first of all, there's no reincarnation in their system. The whole world believed in reincarnation. Those systems were the ones that came without reincarnation. And part of it is because there had to be this, you had to live in a cosmos where you had one life, and based on how you did it, you would either go sit in heaven, return to the pleroma, or you would roast. Okay? And then later on, I guess the Catholics go, oh, this is a little bit rough. We're losing people on this one there. So let's get purgatory going. All right? And also let's have indulgences. But I'm not going to get off on that. So when I plugging in to her intelligence, the planetary intelligence, slowly created, a two-way communication. And much of the communication is in just changes within you. Where you look at yourself and you go, ooh, okay, work's being done. That work being done is a communication. And there are other communications too, but that stuff gets a little dicey, and I prefer to stay I prefer to stay away from that as much as possible, if not completely. So, getting back to the cosmos, that whole shortened that whole thing. So when I'm reading, when I read some of the emotional language in a Nag Hammadi text, I hear about this getting back to Pleroma. To me, getting back to the Pleroma is basically, I've been a good boy, I get to go to heaven. And I have picked nothing up from the cosmic experiment of the Pleroma that was about returning. Nor do I think returning even makes sense. It seems to me if something divine gets sent out and then it starts rising up, the whole thing is that you have a destination that allows the organism to branch out, not to return to itself. I mean, it might be at an end of a cycle where everything does, but it feels like we're still in kind of a expansion cycle. And if I recall, even apparently some years ago, they astrophysicists, I think, were recording some entropy that would be closing down of the galaxy. Well, the last I heard, they were saying the galaxy appears to be growing, which makes sense because entropy is the closing down. And then the term Dan Winter coined, which I think fits well, is negentropy, which is in fact that rather than a system breaking down, it's becoming more coherent. And I believe that greater coherence of the galaxy is part of our mission. And part of that, to me, is through quantum entanglement. Where if the same basic panspermia, and it seems like it would be, was distributed throughout the galaxy, that means that all humanoid species, first of all, have their origin in the same panspermia. So that's going to create a quantum entanglement. So we're having a problem across the galaxy with humanoid type species, or maybe just kind of what we'll call the star thing, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head type thing. So if Sophia can be successful, and we actually wake up and come into partnership and journey with her, we can become the sages. Remember, the sage, wisdom. We're on the planet of wisdom. So I feel that we're supposed to become like little sages. And what I like about that is Sophia has a very playful style. She's really wonderful. Unless, well, we won't speak about Kali right now. Because if you're playing nice, Kali is something you don't really have to concern yourself with. You might have to clean up after her, but it won't be other people you're cleaning up. There's a playfulness. There's an earthiness. And if, earthiness, where did that come from? So I see us being able to be these most wise, fun, fart joke telling beings in the galaxy. I don't know about the fart jokes, but maybe. It could even be where our diets get so good. Remember when we used to fart? I miss those days. But through quantum entanglement, if we can make a jump, kind of like a quantum leap, kind of like we'll call it, not ascension, but the next phase. And for me, 3D and the three dimensionals is really referring to the first three chakras. And to break into that next dimension means to break into our hearts and live there. And the heart is where wisdom, compassion are. So I don't know if you are getting the symbology here. So if we, I call it popping, when we pop. And if we pop through quantum entanglement, we take all the other humanoid species, or at least make that available, to do the pop with us. And so for me, that would be the galactic strategy of what either Sophia through her own agency or through consultation. I mean, she's still part of, she's still of the pleroma. And so that's got its own quantum entanglement. But these are the kind of scenarios when I go into very deep meditations that I experience, that I see, that I come away with like, oh, that's what's going on. And it feels loving. It feels wise. So I'm going to take a breath there. I'm going to go check out. I haven't been looking at the live chat. That's probably one of the reasons why I was able to not get off here. Okay, some stuff here. Dan Winter is the bomb. I did there was a few shows I did when I was doing Mystic View. I think we had Dan Winter as a guest 3 times. It was at least 2, might have been 3. Right. Yes, Pam. And that's why I said I wouldn't call it. To me, ascension is what this popping is really about, where we finally get free of the turmoil of the first 3 chakras. Because until they get balanced, they're in turmoil. You have that battle between logic and the emotions. There's not supposed to be a battle there. The logic and emotions are complementary. They are data sets, and there was never meant to be a war between them. And as long as there is a war between logic and feelings, and usually the reason there's a war between logic and feelings is logic can be off and the feelings are right, or vice versa. But you have to get that stuff sorted out. And until you get that 3 chakra complex sorted out, you cannot really spend most of your time in your heart chakra. Well, thank you, Tamu. Emotion-based logic is illogical. And so, yeah, so again, this whole idea of another spiritual plane to attain is, to me, has great logic and no escapism when you kind of think of, the 3-dimensional world, the one we all want to break through, and how much that really is so symbolic of the first 3 chakras that we're still dealing with. We don't, I mean, the average person, if they know them, they don't understand what data sets you get from them. And so until they're integrated and coordinated, it's sloppy. And so, in other words, that job isn't completed. So one is not going to go to the next step until the other steps have been completed. Yeah. I mean, boy, I could go off on that, but I'm not going to. Okay, I'm gonna take a breather. I'm not gonna go away. I'm gonna I'm gonna put my eyes onto the chat. So if anybody wants to ask a question, make a statement, disagree with me, as I've kind of said many times before, I feel that one of the disservices, one of the things about just the open source of the New Age was that the New Age is not a mythos. There's no mythos. There's endless ideas, snippets of mythos, but there's no complete story. And as much as I very, very much dislike the monotheisms, at least they gave people a map. Now, I think it's a bogus map. Or it could be a map where if you align with that map, perhaps then that's kind of a choice that you make so that when you do drop your physical body, you have a different track to go than people who don't follow that map. And I actually think, and I think I did one of my earlier Can't You Hear Me Gnostic, that false map, the heaven-hell map, that the heaven-hell map is the soul trap that we hear spoken about. In other words, if when you cross over, you're, okay. If we don't have much more time, what would you do first? Okay. Since I can't really continue my thought that I started because this question seems more pertinent. And if the other one was equally pertinent, I'll finish making that because when what would I do first? For me, the first thing to do is get plugged in. There's nothing more important on the planet right now than realizing that whatever God concept you have, getting that correlated to where our divine connection is, where that first connection is. I mean, certain people, like especially a lot of the Gnostic, Sophia gets mentioned, in passing, but it's like, oh, I'm connected to the pleroma. No, yeah, we all does. I mean, again, even, the same spark that animates us is the same spark that animates Sophia. It's the originator spark. But again, that's on the other side of reality. This is reality. Pay attention to what you know. I mean, because it was set up that way. It was set up to make it fairly straightforward and logical. So for me, the first thing from a Gnostic perspective is getting everybody to be aware of the Sophianic narrative so that they can choose. Just where Kali knows who's who. So that would be my answer there. Okay, deist and Hermeticism. So you mean, what is the difference? Well, Mike, I think a deist, from what I understands like, is kind of like positing that there is a creator, and that's a personal matter. And, but we kind of, like some of the wording that you see, I guess maybe in the Declaration of Penance or the Constitution, about there being a creator and that we have the same rights. To me, there's a certain, in the deist concept, there's a certain idea of sovereignty, of, we are the sovereigns of the planet. And then with Hermeticism, you're getting the wisdom of Hermes. I mean, Hermeticist, a deist isn't necessarily an esoterist. A Hermeticist will be an esoterist. I think that would be the best way to parse them out. I hope I did an okay with that answer. I think I gave you a better answer than I might have given. I gave Pam the only answer I really could give, which without much time. What do I think is most important is that people understand their origin, where they come from, and who we're working. Like like who we align with, who we are aligned with in the cosmic story. It's like, who's your daddy? Wrong question. Who's your mama? Now we're getting somewhere. I mean, to me, when you look at a natural, based on nature, like Mother Nature kind of world, males are helpers. I think one of the reasons for, why a patriarchal or very male demented mind would come up with all the patriarchy the way it is because it gives men importance. I mean, men are fine important, but I mean, come on, guys. Giving birth. I mean, guys, in our natural world, where we haven't been worked up into warlike things, we don't squander our bodies and our materials and our time on stupidity like war. We can be very helpful, and obviously there won't be much of a population without our contribution. But guys, giving birth, having another being in your belly, in a natural world, okay, where there is no war, or a healthy natural world where there is no war, think about it, guys. We're assistants. I think we're companions. But I don't know. The universe feels right with Sophia, with a goddess as the core of that. I guess you just hope that they're born with small feet. And actually there was, I'm going to go through that reading I did on the rune because I didn't unpack it. And there was some major unpacking in there. I mean, I'll stay on that theme just for a couple of minutes longer. I kind of did some journeying on past lives, my past lives, and as a whole, not like stop here. It's not like train stations, kind of like the whole route at once. I get the feeling being a woman is not always the first choice. At least not in I know I can't even put it into words. It's funny. I had a really deep experience with lots of feeling into it. But I've never tried to put it in words. And as I'm trying to put it into words, it's not going there. So I think I'm going to pick up the book. And my memory allows me to remember it was page 131. I guess the ginkgo's working. Okay. So the rune is, he calls it Rado, but in the older book it's called Rad. I've already showed it to you, but in case, let's see. Let me go to my, I have to get off that and go back to my camera. Take off my glasses for a second, get my hair out of my face. There we go. So that's the rune. Okay. Journey, communication, union, reunion. That was the rune I pulled. And it's this first opening one that I think is huge. Especially, and what reminded me was what I had just spoken of, about the genders. This rune is concerned with communication, with the attunement of something that has two sides, two elements, and with the ultimate union that comes at the end of the journey, when what is above and what is below are united and of one mind. That was one sentence, by the way. So, the two sides. So, there's one aspect of that to me that, is quite animal or organic, and that would be male and female. The attunement of something that has two sides. And male and female are what? Gender sides of an androgynous spirit. And then when what is above and what is below are united and of one mind. And that's, to me, where we bond. We enter into the dreaming of our journey, and from a now, the journey would be part of a future. And that we are united and of one mind. And that's part of the journey, is that uniting of minds and then proceeding from that union. Similarly, with the genders, we start realizing that there is such a thing as a divine feminine and a divine masculine, but there's also a toxic feminine and a toxic masculine. And when one side is toxic, would that be the masculine side? Being as they, the sides are really two sides of one thing, it's very hard to have toxic masculinity without having toxic femininity. So, in many ways, if we're going to see, and we are going to see the returns, it's a matter of, I guess numbers is one way to put it. The divine masculine and divine feminine are going to kind of be showing up around the same time. They are already blossoming. And it's important for them to blossom because we learn best by example. And so the best way for toxic men and toxic women to detoxify is to have examples of what that looks like. And I really think men should decide amongst themselves through meeting, what does that look like? Women can meet. And then when they've kind of figured that out, then they kind of ask the other side, what do you think, what we think? And if we can enter into the sacred union with the planet and her wisdom and her love, and of course she's not alone, Thelate's there too. And I never forget the androgyny of the goddess. I never forget. It's actually in When things get really close, it's kind of hard. There's no question that she's a goddess, but boy, is that potent. It's I largely androgynous with like it's like there's a little sugar and spice dropped in there. Let me continue. Inner worth mounts here, and at such a time you are not intended to rely entirely upon your own power. So, as I read that, and again, I pulled this within a context. This wasn't just like pull it out. This is connected. It's connected to our journey. It's connected to the journey of this next year. Specific, right now we're focusing on a year. And so, not intended, inner worth mounts here. This means self-validation. Once you have inner worth, you don't go looking around for compliments. Compliments always feel good. They're always delicious. But you don't go looking for them, and if you don't get them, you get sullen. That's inner worth has its own value system. So inner worth mounts here, and at such a time, you are not intended to rely entirely upon your own power. And again, I see two communications here. One is that we're not doing it alone. We're doing it with Sophia because we are in a dream if we choose to participate. I mean, we're in it anyway, but you can either lucid dream or just be in a nightmare. And unless we decide to lucid dream and get involved, we will continue in the nightmare. And then the other one is not. And then of course, like in each case where I'm doing these joining, one is with each other, and one is with our Creator. So we won't be. This is the whole purpose of getting into community. This way here, we all have different skills, and when we pull all those skills together into one organism called community, that means that this one organism has skills way beyond what one person would. Next sentence. Ask through prayer or meditation, through addressing the witness self, the teacher within. So, for me, I do have what I call a higher self, but more often I'm going into my heart because I really want. To me, the heart is where that conversation with VV, with this planetary intelligence occurs. And I think the reason why I feel that the communication occurs there is because that is the energy center we have that is so much close to the wisdom, the love, the compassion, the qualities of the heart, and the qualities of Sophia as a quality. I mean, an aeon as a quality. To me, they're one and the same. So. In a 7 chakra system, the heart is a centerpiece. So you have the hub and the spokes. I'll just read one more sentence. The journey is towards self-healing, self-change, and union. I'm going to come back into the chat now. And what's fun about doing this, and the fact that I had the great pleasure to meet Raksha and become a friend of his, become a brother of his, is the ability to share that kind of space and bounce off each other and get inspired. And the other interesting thing is that Raksha is kind of coming from a Mother Earth, more from kind of like a Native American indigenous perspective. So, in other words, the the understanding of the earth, the reverence for the earth that, let's say, many of the indigenous tribes, the ones that we kind of know about in America, their reverence for the earth shows that clear understanding, very clear understanding. When you get into their mythos, it doesn't quite look like the mythos of the Gnostics of Eurasia. But it's the same reverence, and that's the core. That's what matters. Any mythos that allows you to realize that we have Mother Earth, and what that means for us, and how we conduct ourselves on the planet, is what matters. So even though there might be some difference of detail in the mythos, it's the same mythos. I mean, it's based in the Divine Mother and care of the earth, and thinking about the generations ahead, starting from the very next child being born. A lot of people hear 7 generations. Oh boy, it's plenty of time to work with. It starts with the very next baby born into a community. That's the beginning of the 7 generations. So the work is now. It's all now, and it's just so great. And then even the inspirations, like we have conversations about what we're feeling, and then I'll listen to a stream of his, and it's like, ooh, I remember that conversation. And then I get on here, and it's coming out of conversations that I've either had with him personally, based on a stream he did. The themes are so in alignment, and they're there naturally. These are not. There's no real coordination in an external. The coordination is almost like it's kind of like you have to ring the synchronicity bell for the coordination, because it's kind of almost coordination through synchronicity as opposed to coordination through planning. Not that there's zero plan, but I mean it's not coordinated. It's inspiration. And just in case anybody thinks I smoke a lot, this is the same cigarette I started 2 hours ago. Same original cigarette. That's what I like about organic tobacco, is it goes out, because tobacco, is the kind of thing that won't, especially when it's wrapped up, won't burn when it's not being encouraged to burn. Unlike tobacco product that has things in there to keep that cigarette burning. I mean, imagine, just imagine from a sales perspective, the people, their whole thing is to sell cigarettes, and somebody like myself who puts down a cigarette after a puff or two, and then it goes out and I can relight it. You kidding? Shareholders won't stand for that shit. No, man, put something in that tobacco, make it burn. If you ain't smoking it, you're losing it. Let me see what's going on in the live chat. I'm looking at things. Hello, no knowledge. Hi. Just so you come in here. It is sometimes hard to believe how long we have endured the lies, but the lies started, basically, I mean, I know in my perspective, it kind of started with, not quite, I didn't have religious parents, but, I had neighbors, oh, your parents aren't taking you to church? Oh, I'll take you to church, save your soul for you, something like that. Yeah, no, we've been pretty beat up over the centuries, but that's why the historical, at least for me, the historical perspective is important when you realize just how much brute force it took to get the world to bend its mind and become insane. It took millions of dead bodies to get that change of quote unquote heart. I've been having a lot of time with good time with music, and I definitely want to finish up some of my own songs. The whole thing is getting the words. I have a music muse, but I don't have a lyric muse. I'm trying to call one. Although it seems to me I have a muse that actually is waiting. It says, as soon as you put a pen on a piece of paper, we'll continue what you start. So I kind of think I know what that means. But once I have the words written to the many musical pieces, I can do little solo versions of them. And I want to do my own music largely because I can't get a copyright strike doing your own music now, can you? And so here we are. Usually, I would have said goodnight by this time. But our sister Groovy Bean is not doing her Groovy Bean Monday night thing. And that's sad. It's circumstantial, but if you don't know why, it's best not to go into that. But I do not have her stream to point you towards tonight, sadly. I would say, though, as we are, I think there's nobody here that it really probably would be wasted. It would probably be wasted on the good company that we have here. But we need to be more mindful of how we treat others. And this is really where, well, in this particular instance, because in certain instances, what I'm about to say might actually stand to be reversed. But certainly, the people who've been through difficult times and come out wounded. I mean, basically, when you have a fresh wound, you have to treat it like with ridiculous care, or you will break what little bit has already mended, and then it can be prone to infection. There's a certain time of healing that it's fragile and it must be treated a certain way. It can take zero abuse, zero, or it will break down. And sometimes some of these data streams about how fragile a person might be emotional, the data stream is something that men might miss. Men hear their third chakra or their mental body louder than they normally hear their emotional body. It's there, but it's a focus. It's like, you got to turn the dial a little bit. Acknowledge that there's a stream coming there, and it's rich. And but like there, sometimes we have chats, and some of the issues around Groovy Bean were part of a public discussion. Different people were saying different things. Some people were making very good logical points. So what was very interesting was during a live chat when certain people were going over certain of the points of this, presenting the different sides. I'm watching the chat. And usually, look, we're all above, that kind of the silly gender stuff, the silly stuff. But I'm watching the chat, and there was a lot of people. It was, when things get a little bit intense, people will often speak. And then I noticed something. That there were certain people who just wanted to sit it out. I understand that. But there were people who were not going to sit it out. They wanted to voice how they felt or thought or both on the subject. And I started noticing about as distinct a line as I think I've ever seen between genders regarding what Groovy was going through. And there, we have a fair amount of grandmothers amongst the women in our group. And all I can say was the grandmothers unequivocally supported Groovy or Yvonne. And the men understood. They were kind of in touch with it, but the logic of what wasn't, the logic was not taking into account the fragility, the data stream that will allow us to know what state a wound is in was not something that we could use our logic to get. That information about what was going on with somebody we cared about wasn't coming through logic. It was coming through the feelings. This was a thing of empathy. And I'm going to tell you that, again, I was sitting there in my logic, and I had my own touch into it. But apparently, it wasn't until I saw the grandmothers with one voice, basically saying one thing, I said, okay, that's a data stream I cannot ignore. So as soon as I pulled that data stream into myself, it completely reset me. So this is, so I said, in this case, for me, it was a case where to really get it, to understand it, to be able to feel it, you had to largely process this emotionally. And then once you had the emotion, then you could go into your logic and go, gee, what's the smart thing to do here? What's the logical thing to do here? What's the smart thing? The smart thing is you let the wound heal a bit. You let that, you let that tissue close up. You don't tell it that it should have been closed already. Maybe it should never have been opened. That's an opinion. So, anyway, the too much logic, too much male energy got involved in that situation, couldn't empathize, so therefore could not process and get a true reading on what was really going on. They made it about themselves. Oh, how can one person dictate how we all behave, walking on eggshells? We weren't walking on eggshells. We were trying to let somebody heal. Nobody was giving up their sovereignty. People were making a compassionate decision. A decision of wisdom. And unfortunately, wisdom is a little bit short in certain parts of the greater community. The only even reason why I'm kind of addressing this is that it might get out a bit. And the whole thing is, I'm not trying to make anybody bad or wrong here, but I would anybody who might say, "Oh, gee, did I get that wrong?" You know something? If you can get there, then you can forgive yourself. Because if you can get that, that means that you learned something. You won't do that. Chances are you won't do that same thing again. And I'll have to tell you though, if it hadn't been for my own, I mean, I was never going to be antagonistic at all. But I was hearing some of the logic. And if it had not been for my sisters and the fact that they stood in their strength and spoke what they had to say, and basically were saying, we ain't having none of your logic. This person is wounded, and all this other shit just does not apply. So my wisdom came from their wisdom. I had the wisdom to notice them, to realize the strength and the validity and clarity of that signal. The logic of the men was all over the place. It was like, logic, it's thought experiments, ideas floating around. The women weren't playing with experiments. They weren't experimenting with whether or not Groovy was hurt and needed a little special attention. They knew it. So once I finally could realize that they knew it, I could know it. So my brothers, pay attention to our sisters. By pay attention, this means pay attention to what they're doing. Sometimes you might go, but pay attention. Hello, shadow self. My sisters, pay attention to your brothers. We need to keep each other honest. Males tend to be, no absolutes, males tend to be more logical. Women tend to be more emotional. So because of that, that means that most men tend to be too logical. And conversely, women can be too emotional. So obviously, we need each other to balance each other out. And we need to be observing each other to see what we can learn from each other. Not what we can critique about each other. Not that a critique might not arise, but that's not, we're observing to observe. We're observing to have all the data streams that we can. Hello, Zach. Hello. The broster knew it too. Yes, he did. Raksha helped me enormously. Because again, I think I've been quite honest that I knew how to conduct myself. But in my conduct, I was straining a little bit. My logic was acting a little bit, not completely. But like I said, I knew how to carry myself. I knew what was the correct behavior. But at times it was just like, and if it would not been for Raksha was able to take me where I needed to be taken. So the broster came through. But the women won't always be right. The men won't always be right. We will have to rediscover the divine masculine and divine feminine in each other, so we become dance partners instead of people on opposing sides, coming together only because Eros made us do it. So Raksha and I are going to do another Mystic and the Moose in, well, the way time's moving, it'll be like in the next couple of hours, but it won't actually be the next couple of hours. Thank you, Pam. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining for the stream. I really appreciate you being here. So I look forward to that. A little Mystic and Moose time. We're playing with the scheduling. It's just a matter of, well, it'll go up when it happens. Goodbye. Good night, Pam, or good afternoon. I don't know where you are, so be well. All right. So I had a pleasant time tonight. Enjoyed. I feel good. I'm in a pretty good mood. It's funny. I was out before this, and I was buying some tobacco, and the woman, the cashier, she was in a really good. She was like playing drums and like on a thing, because she was waiting for me to pull out my credit card. So she was like, bup, 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 bup. And she says, "Oh, don't mind me. I'm in a good mood." I said, "I'm in a good mood too. I'm just not as effusive about it, or just not as effusively." And it was good, because it was kind of like able to give myself the idea that, remind myself that I was actually, because when she said that, I checked in myself, I said, "Hey, I'm in a pretty good mood too. I'm just not quite, I'm not at the moment playing drums on the counter." And as an Aspie, for me it's usually, part of that is because if I stop playing drums on the counter, I might go into a full performance. Did you hear this one? Hey, how you like this beat? I really can't. I can really get lost in having fun very, very quickly. I have a naturally joyous spirit. So anyway, I guess I will now get on with my Monday night. Finish eating. I did have a slice of spinach pizza, Amy's organic spinach pizza, and I'll have some more. And so I just thank you all. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of the same people, occasionally new names. I really look forward to Monday nights, and spending time with everybody. So that'll be it for this week of Can't You Hear Me Gnostic? Journeys and Maps. Be well. I love you all. And see you next time. Actually, that's right. Something I forgot, that after I hit the stop streaming, it takes a few seconds. So I just hit stop streaming, and it'll take a few seconds, and I'll be talking, and it'll probably cut me off in the middle of a sentence, which is fine with me. Be well. Take care of yourselves. And stay sane. Oh, a little bit of longer delay than I thought. Oh, something? Maybe I didn't hit stop streaming. Oh, I didn't.